year as part of a sweeping national security effort. The State Department said today the revocations involved individuals linked to terrorism, crime, or public safety threats, as well as visa overstays. Officials also said 16,000 visas were canceled this year for DUI offenses, 12,000 for assault, and 8,000 for theft. The State Department says the Trump administration will not hesitate to revoke visas from foreigners who undermine our laws or threaten national security. Recently, the department invalidated visas of foreign nationals for publicly celebrating the assassination of Turning Point founder Charlie Kirk. Democrats have criticized the Trump administration's revocation of student visas, saying it's been done in many cases without justification or explanation. A federal judge in Oregon will rule today on whether President Trump violated federal law by deploying National Guard troops to Portland. District Judge Karen Immergut's decision follows a high-profile trial testing the limits of presidential power to use the military on U.S. soil.
Troop deployments remain on hold under a temporary court order, and Immergut will decide whether to make that block permanent. The case hinges on whether the protests in Portland amounted to a rebellion that could legally justify a military response. At least 32 people have been charged with federal crimes stemming from the Portland protests since they began in June. About half the defendants were charged with assaulting federal officers, including 14 felonies and 7 misdemeanors. Charging documents describe protesters kicking and shoving officers, usually while resisting arrest. Prosecutors say protesters have also spat on officers and thrown rocks, a water bottle, and a kitchen knife.
Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem shared a post on X today saying ICE has received more than 200,000 applications from patriotic Americans who want to defend the homeland by removing the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens from the U.S. She said Americans are answering their country's call to serve and help remove murderers, pedophiles, rapists, terrorists, and gang members from our country. The State Department said 80,000 visas have been revoked. Joining us to discuss is Gerard Filitti, a foreign affairs analyst and attorney specializing in international law. So, Gerard, good afternoon to you. How much discretion does the administration have to revoke visas on this scale?
The administration has tremendous discretion under the law, under immigration statutes, to revoke visas and to deny access or entry to America by foreign nationals. As a condition for entry in the United States, you're agreeing to a set of conditions. These include not committing crime. It includes not taking policy positions that are adverse to U.S. policy interests. So essentially, the government has a large latitude in removing immigrants on a visa, whether that's a temporary or a work visa or a student visa, if they do not agree with the conduct of these immigrants.
So can you clarify for us legally what constitutes as a threat to national security? This has been referenced as for some of the reasons for the revocations. How is the general term support for terrorism interpreted?
Support for terrorism is interpreted as it is in federal laws that deal with support for terrorism, meaning advocacy beyond just words for terrorist organizations. However, what's different is that the federal government can determine that support is not just a terrorist support, but it is a foreign policy consideration. So really, we have to draw the distinction between two different categories. Terrorist support, as we call it colloquially, as we're talking about it on air, doesn't really mean material support, doesn't really mean helping a terrorist organization. What it means in the eyes of the Trump administration is taking a foreign policy position that's adverse to the interests of America. For example, supporting Hamas against Israel or supporting other designated terrorist organizations, propagandizing for them. So it's not the same type of material support, for example, providing weapons or money, but it is providing propaganda services and advocating for them.
And Gerard, how do you view the administration's screening of social media accounts of visa holders? Is this acting within the law?
It is acting within the law for most visa holders from most countries where we do not have an easy access reciprocal treaty. People who apply for visas have to undergo screening. In many parts of the world, they have to present themselves to the U.S. embassy or consulate for an interview and provide all sorts of biographical and background information, including criminal background checks about themselves in order to get that visa. So this is definitely not unprecedented. This is the way the system works. What's different now is that the administration is vigorously looking at the social media profiles of people that have already been admitted to the country, arguing that the Biden administration and prior administrations were very lax when it came to these background checks.
So can you address this, Gerard? Because legal visa holders in the U.S. have some First Amendment protections as well. So could you address how the visas of 6 foreigners accused of celebrating Charlie Kirk's death were revoked?
Well, that's the issue that ultimately may have to be heard by the Supreme Court. We all understand that First Amendment protections apply within America. However, there has traditionally been a carve-out in immigration law that does not apply the entirety of the First Amendment rights that you have the freedom of speech to people who hold these visas, for the simple reason that the government can regulate who it allows in the country and on what grounds. So it's very much like being a guest in someone's house when you're here on a visa. If you're saying things, you don't have the same liberties that you would if you were a citizen by birth or naturalization of the United States. So for many years, courts have held a distinction between between the First Amendment rights enjoyed by American citizens and those applied to people who are here on a visa. Now, when it comes to the nature of the speech, when we have speech that is so shocking and traumatic that it affects the national security of the United States, or it propagandizes murder, or it encourages violent acts, then that's not going to be held when it's done by foreigners to the same First Amendment protections as a citizen would have.
Okay, so Gerard, I want to present this argument to you. Now, I'm not a legal expert, but can it or can it not be argued that a certain degree of ideological vetting might help ensure that individuals entering the country share at least, a baseline respect for democracy and human rights?
Well, I think ideological vetting would be something that that could show whether someone is sharing the values and principles, the democratic values and principles of the United States. But in practice, this is very different to implement because we don't really know what is in a person's heart and mind. The best we can do is look at statements this person has made, look at their criminal background, look at their educational background, and see whether there's anything in their history that suggests animosity to our values. That's what the Trump administration is doing now in vetting foreigners, looking to see what it can tell about the character of these people and whether admitting them to the United States will pose a danger because their character is inherently contrary to American principles of democracy.
Can you speak to the difference, if any, between free speech protections for foreign nationals in the U.S. versus actual citizens?
To some extent, and there has not been that much jurisprudence, that much law about this over the years. There have been some cases, but not nearly enough. And I do think the Supreme Court will ultimately weigh in. But the way things have been interpreted is it's almost a sliding scale. When you're a citizen, pretty much everything is First Amendment that's not slander, defamatory, a threat, or incitement to violence. When you are here on a visa, that depends, your speech protections depend on the nature of your speech. If you are arguing or propagandizing against the US government, for example, or supporting terrorism, that's not going to be protected by the First Amendment. If, on the other hand, you are merely saying something that some people dislike but otherwise does not impact the US government or foreign policy or national security, courts will probably rule that you do have a First Amendment right to say it. So the bottom line is it depends on what people are saying when they exercise their First Amendment rights.
So, Gerard, do legal visa holders have the right to challenge any revocation in court?
Generally speaking, there are some protections. There are some due process protections. And again, it depends on the type of visa. It depends on whether you're here as a visitor on a visitor visa, which can very easily be revoked. It's not the same level of scrutiny, for example, as if you are here on a work visa or an immigrant visa. If you are here on the type of visa that gives you residency in the United States, then you can have that challenge with an immigration court. You do have rights to exercise to fight the revocation and the deportation. But if you're merely here as a visitor, then you are pretty much out of luck.
Okay, Gerard, just to end the interview, can you talk to us about what you think might be the impacts of such revocations at such a scale?
Well, I think the impact on this is playing out more on university campuses than anywhere else, because this is one of the populations that's largely affected. We had some 8,000 revocations of student visas in this batch. And when you're revoking student visas, universities change in nature. We know that we have many students, especially graduate students at Harvard and many other institutions who are here, whether it's from communist China or from other countries, that are benefiting from our education system. So these revocations change the character, maybe for the better, of our education system. But in general, the message it sends to foreigners is that we will hold you to the same standards that you hold us. Many countries, most countries, have restrictions on immigration and visitors to their countries. What we're doing is merely doing what other countries do, which is vetting the people we allow in.
Okay, Gerard, always good to talk to you. Hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Cornell University has agreed to pay $60 million in order to get federal funding back. The Ivy League